Well, good evening to everybody. We've got a lot to get through this evening. It's a big topic. So I'm going to make a start. So I'm going to share my screen, share my slides. Okay. So we're now on the fourth of the talks in the Introducing Buddhism course. And this is really probably the most important of the talks that I'm going to give, because this is going to tell you how to follow a Buddhist practice, how to walk the Buddha's way, because tonight we're covering the Noble Eightfold Path, the elements of the Eightfold Path that constitutes a Buddhist practice. I just want to say a word about noble. We talked about the four noble truths last week, and the fourth of the four noble truths is the Noble Eightfold Path. When I use the word noble, really, I mean ennobling. In other words, these truths, this path will make you noble rather than being something noble in a sense of being royal or special or anything of that sort. It really, a better translation will be ennobling. But before we go on to the course, tonight's talk, I just want to recap that we did a little bit of homework last week. So I asked you simply to sit in a chair for 15 minutes to see what happened. When I joined the Buddhist Society in about 20 odd years ago, this was an exercise we were given to do in the Introducing course, was to sit in a chair for 15 minutes. And I'm sorry to have to tell you that I fell asleep in my 15 minutes, which is probably what would happen if I sat quietly for 15 minutes now. But what I wanted you to do is have a go at this exercise. It's not a meditation exercise. I know some of you can meditate and some of you maybe don't meditate. This wasn't about meditation. This was simply about observing what was happening in those 15 minutes. I suspect some of you didn't get around to doing it, and that's fine. And some of you will have had a go. But what I'm hoping you will have observed in those 15 minutes of quiet with nothing else happening is that there's an awful lot going on in our minds that most of the time we pay really no attention to. But once we sit quietly with nothing else happening, you suddenly notice there's an awful lot of clutter going on in your mind. Your thoughts about what's happened in the day, thoughts about what might be about to happen later in the evening, remembering conversations that you've had at work, remembering things that someone might have said to you, just thoughts going on and on and on and on and on. And most of the time, we're not really engaged with what's happening in the here and now. You're not really probably aware of the ticking of the clock in the room or the creaking of the central heating or anything of that sort, because your mind is like yabba, 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 yabba. And this cartoon really shows the distinction between the man going for a walk and his mind is anywhere but here, and the dog going for a walk just concentrating on the smells and the sounds and the sights. Now, there's nothing wrong with these thoughts in your mind that are coming and going all the time, and you certainly shouldn't be trying to stop them. This is a common misunderstanding about meditation, is that you're not supposed to be thinking, that you're supposed to be stopping the thoughts. And that wasn't what this exercise is all about. It was simply to bring into your awareness the fact that your mind is incredibly busy all the time and distracted from what is happening here and now, because most of us like, when things are a bit quiet and there's nothing going on, to drift back into thoughts about the past, memories of what's happened, planning for the future, not even spending even a few seconds in the here and now, observing what is happening here and now. And that's really one of the things we train ourselves to do through meditation, But this wasn't a meditation exercise. It was simply an observation of what's going on all the time, is that things inside are incredibly busy and there's a lot of stuff going on, which a lot of the time we're not even aware it is all going on there. So let's get into tonight's talk without further ado. So just to recap on what we talked about last week, which is the 4 noble truths the Buddha taught: suffering I teach and the way out of suffering. So the first noble truth is that there is dukkha, or suffering, or dissatisfaction in life. We talked about the cause or origin of that, which is basically that we crave things, we want things, we desire things for me. But the Buddha also said there's an alternative to that. There is a way in which suffering can cease. And tonight we're going to cover that path to the cessation of suffering, which is the noble eightfold path, the ennobling eightfold path. And that is divided into 3 main pillars or trainings. There is wisdom, the path of wisdom, seeing things as they really are. And the 2 elements of that, which we're covering tonight, will be right understanding or right view, and right thought or right intention. Then there's the path of morality or ethical conduct, which is divided into right speech, right action, and right livelihood. And then there's the 3rd pillar, which is mental discipline, which is divided into right effort, right concentration, and right mindfulness or right awareness. And I just want to bring this book to your attention. If any of you want to do a little bit of further reading about the Noble Eightfold Path, this is a book written by a contemporary Tibetan Lama, and it's all about the Noble Eightfold Path in detail. It gives you a contemporary explanation of what these elements of the path are, and it gives you some exercises, meditations to do to help with each of the steps on the path. If you want to read an interesting, well-written, modern book about the Noble Eightfold Path, this is a good one. So before we get on to the beginning of the Eightfold Path, I need to talk to you about 3 fetters, which in traditional Buddhist teaching, these are the 3 fetters that will anchor you to this realm of toing and froing, coming and going, birth and rebirth, the realm of samsara, which we're going to talk about more next week. So the 3 fetters in Buddhist teaching, which will tie you firmly in this round and cycle of endless coming and going and repetition of habits and birth and rebirth. So these are the 3 fetters which we need to try and overcome if we're going to progress down the path. The first fetter is a firm belief in the self. In other words, a fixed belief in my identity as a separate self, as something that's permanent, that doesn't change, that sense of ego, that sense of selfishness that we've been talking about week after week. That is a very, very strong belief that most of us have grown up with and live with all of our lives, but that belief will really hinder you in your progress if you allow it to. The second of the 3 fetters is doubt and wavering concerning the teaching. Now, we don't want to say you have blind faith in Buddhist teaching, because of course that's not really what the Buddha himself said. The Buddha said, try it out and come and see for yourself if it works for you. But we do need at least have some confidence that these teachings are appropriate and useful. If we don't have the confidence, we're not really going to try them out. And if we don't try them out, we're not going to work out whether they're useful or not useful. So doubt and wavering, a lack of confidence that the Buddha's teachings are useful and worth adopting, and that's another of the 3 fetters. And then finally, one we mentioned last week as well, attachment or clinging to rites and rituals. We all do tend to get trapped into this, because when you come into religious practice, you like to understand what are the ways in which things are done. Do we do it this way? Do we do it that way? When I'm in meditation, should my eyes be closed? Should they be open? How do I set up my little shrine? Do I put the candle here? Do I put the flowers there? How am I to bow? What should I wear? We get very, very attached to the trappings and the paraphernalia rather than getting on with the thing itself. There's an old Zen saying, do not mistake the pointing finger for the moon. You know, if I'm pointing at the moon, it's not my finger you should be focusing on, it's the moon. So the rites and rituals, if we get too hung up in those, that will be a hindrance as well. Which leads me to a nice story, which I think you'll all like, the story of the monk and the kitten. So the story concerns a monk who was meditating in the forest and sitting under the tree, meditating, and a little kitten came along and started playing with him and pestering him and being a bit of a nuisance. I have to say my cat is also a bit of a nuisance when I'm meditating, but that's by the by. So the monk eventually, to get on with his meditation, he made a little grass, plaited some grass together, and he made a little collar for the cat and a little leash. And when he was going to sit to meditate, he put the collar on the cat and tied the strand of leash around the tree. So the cat was tethered and he could get on with his meditation. And that went very, very well. It became so... He became very well renowned as a great practitioner, a great teacher, a great meditator, and people came from far and wide to observe him doing his meditation and to learn from him. And eventually they started asking themselves, well, what's with the cat? Do we all need a cat? And then eventually people started saying, well, yeah, you do need a cat, and it has to be this particular type of cat. It should be a tabby cat, not a black and white cat. And the plaiting of the neck collar needs to be this grass and this particular plait, and then you tie it to the tree with this particular knot, and this is how you meditate. You can see the point of the story, can't you? The people had totally misunderstood entirely what was going on here, which was simply, there happens to be a cat and it happens to be over there. This is not the purpose of what I'm doing here. But we so easily get beguiled by the trappings and the trimmings. I like to think of it as the bells and the smells, you know, the incense, the chimes, etc. This is very important and attractive to us, but the actual simple, pure essence of Buddhism and the meditation and the practice itself totally escapes us because we get completely beguiled by the outer trappings, the things to wear, the things to do. So don't get drawn into that attachment to rites and rituals and the way things are done. Simply get on with the practice. So here we go, the Noble Eightfold Path. So the three pillars we talked about, the pillar of wisdom, the pillar of morality, and the pillar of concentration. Or in other words, wisdom, seeing things as they really are, rather than seeing things as I think they should be, or I think they might be, or the way I perceive things, this is the way it is. Seeing things as they actually are. The pillar of morality or ethics, that's living a good life. Living a good life that is in harmony with everything and causes as little harm and suffering to yourself and others as you can. And that's what the three elements of the path of morality are pointing towards. And then finally, concentration, being present in the moment. So we've learned from our exercise sitting in the chair that we'll do anything other than be present in the moment, because being present in the moment is actually pretty boring sometimes. We like to drift off into our thoughts, our memories, our dreams, much more interesting than being present in the here and now. But you have to train not to do that and to actually live your life. So we'll come on to these things in a moment. I said to you last week that the path is not a linear progress. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and I cannot move to the next step until I've mastered the first one. It's actually more like a wheel And these are the 8 spokes of the wheel, and this 8-spoked wheel represents the Dharma. This is a symbol you'll see as a representation of Buddhism. These 8 elements are to be practiced and perfected concurrently. It's not a linear progress from step to step to step. We work on all of these things together. And in the same way that if one spoke of a wheel is more tense or more loose than the others, the wheel gets out of balance. You have to try and work on all of these things concurrently and keep things in balance so that your wheel will spin true. Okay, so let's begin with right view or right understanding or right seeing. And there are various things which come into this this element of right view. The first thing is right understanding, right view. If you've never heard of Buddha and the Dharma or heard any of the teachings, then really that's the starting block, really, is to be able to be in a place where you can listen to the Buddha's teachings, hear the Buddha's teachings, and put them into practice for yourself. So this is an important thing. But the trouble with our way of seeing things, as I've shown you this image before of a glass that's clouded by dirt, is that our way of seeing things is so biased by my perceptions of myself, my notions, my thoughts about how things should be. It is incredibly difficult to see things clearly as they really are. So to cultivate right view or right seeing is to try and little by little let go of these I bias notions. So you do start to see things clearly in the way they should be. So yes, right understanding about the Buddha's teachings and the Buddhist path, but also seeing the way things are in a clear way, seeing things as they actually are, rather than seeing things as I perceive them through my deluded, I-biased way of seeing. And the analogy for how right seeing should be is a mirror. The mirror reflects what is. You know, if I hold up a mirror to you, you will see what is reflected in the mirror. And if I move the mirror, you'll see the reflection changing. The mirror doesn't hang on to the thing it's reflected just now. It lets it go and moves on to the next thing. So the mirror just simply reflects what is there to be reflected and doesn't reflect some distorted view of that, nor does it hang on to the thing that was there a moment ago or jump ahead to the next thing. It simply reflects what is actually there. And that really is a very good analogy for what clear seeing is, reflecting simply reality as it is rather than as I think it should be. And in fact, the mirror is a very important metaphor for clear seeing, which you come across again and again, particularly in Zen teaching. So I'm going to tell you a story which I think gives you an example of what clear seeing or right view, how it can be distorted by my notions. So this is a story called The Parable of the Snake, which you'll find in your information packs. So this story regards a man out in India. He's walking home through the forest at dusk, and he suddenly sees on the ground in front of him a snake. And of course, it's India. Snakes are often poisonous there. So he recoils in horror. Said that the Buddha is standing nearby and says, "Look again." And he looks again at the snake on the path, and he sees that it's actually a coil of rope. So you can see, can't you, this snake-like appearance is actually a piece of rope, which is harmless, and he can pick it up and throw it aside and carry on his journey. And in some versions of the story, the Buddha says, "Look again." And when he actually picks up the rope to look at it, is actually a string of jewels. But I suppose the point of that story is this, that the man he's in India, it's dusk, he's walking home through the forest. There may well be snakes around, and probably in his mind, he is thinking a little bit, There might be something on the path here, there might be a snake, there might be something. So when he sees the object on the path, he doesn't see it for what it actually is, which is a piece of rope. He sees it as a snake. And that's what I mean by the way our thoughts and beliefs and really the causes and conditions that bring us into the place we are now make us see things in maybe sometimes a slightly deluded way, a slightly we misunderstand what we're seeing because of the beliefs and backgrounds, all the things that are fed up to that moment of us being there and seeing it. Whereas if you could just strip away all of those notions and fears, you would simply see the thing in front of you for what it is, which is simply a piece of old rope. Another thing about clear seeing is that you can only see things clearly if your mind is receptive to seeing things. So this is a story, another Zen teaching story of a university lecturer who went up to the Zen temple to have a conversation with a Zen master there, and he said, you know, what can you teach me? I've been studying Buddhism, and but I want to actually now talk to a Zen master himself and understand a little bit more about the practice. So the Zen master says, yes, I'll happily teach you, but first of all, let's have a cup of tea. And so brings out some cups and starts to pour the tea. And he pours the tea, and when the cup is full, brimming over, the Zen master is still pouring. And the university teacher says, stop, the cup is overflowing. Stop pouring. And the Zen master says, well, this is like your mind. Your mind is so full already of your own notions and opinions and beliefs. There's no room for anything else in there. How can I teach you anything unless you empty out your already full of your own ideas and opinions about what the Buddhist practice is? How can I teach you anything until you've emptied that cup out? So as well as seeing things clearly and understanding, we mustn't have so many views and opinions and beliefs that there's really no room for anything new to come in. So before we can put anything else, before we can bring anything else in, we have to empty out our minds, empty out our hearts of our own preconceived notions and opinions. Otherwise, there's no room for anything else. So right intention, right thought, right motives. What am I doing this for? Why am I doing this practice? Is it because I want to get something? Is it because I want to get something for me? And to be honest, at the heart of almost everything we do is some kind of feel of I need something for myself. What's in it for me? Why am I doing this? And this is really driven by those three fires, isn't it? It's the greed, the need to acquire something, the need to acquire something for me. What's in it for me? The dislike of maybe, you know, the situation I'm in now, I want it to change. And that deluded I bias way of seeing things, that ignorance. So those three fires, those three passions drive us towards away from right intention, right motivation, because we're always wanting to get something for ourselves. You've probably got little inklings about what doing a Buddhist practice might mean for you. Will it mean I'll be happier? Will I get in towards enlightenment? And will I have a perfect blissful life? All of these things almost certainly are driven by some selfish idea about something that's going to make life better for me. But you have to give that up. And one of the things we always did in the Zen school was to turn over any merits we had acquired through our practice for the benefit of all sentient beings. And really, when we're doing a Buddhist practice, we should be doing it for the benefit of all rather than for the benefit of me. And that requires having a much more generous attitude, much more generous lack of selfishness in our motivation, and that underpins right motives. So the three elements in Buddhism of right thought, right motives, right intention is the intention of letting go of that clinging, grabbing desire. We need to let go not be grabbing things for myself. We need to cultivate goodwill, a desire to be helpful for other people, to be kind and compassionate, which will counter that intention of ill will, that fire of aversion and hatred. And then there's the intention of harmlessness. We should be really trying as Buddhists to be as quintessentially harmless as we can, of doing as much good as we can and as little harm as we can. And that's a very important part of right intention, of right motivation. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the morality or ethical or living a good life. And probably the most difficult part of that of all is right speech. You know, we're all very clever humans, we're very clever monkeys, and we have the power of speech, and we can do so much harm with our speech. And it's probably one of the most difficult things for us to guard and manage, because we, through idle chatter or harmful or malicious chatter, can do so much harm, not just to ourselves, but to other people as well. And one of the things to think about in Buddhism is the idea that before the words come out of your mouth, they should really go through a gate to just check that they fulfill the following things. Number one, is what I'm about to say true? Number two, is what I'm about to say kind? Number three, is what I'm about to say necessary? In other words, we shouldn't be speaking untruthful things, we shouldn't be speaking unkind things, and we shouldn't be speaking idle, frivolous, unnecessary chit-chat things. And this is actually a very hard thing to do, but it's something we need to practice. It doesn't mean you need to be completely ridiculously unkind to people in an effort to be truthful. If someone says to you, does my bum look big in this? It's not kind to say, yes, it does. It might be truthful, but it may not be kind. So just be careful and make sure that by making an effort to be kind, to be truthful, you're not actually being unkind as well. But certainly, is it necessary? Is it necessary to gossip? Is it necessary to chat about people when they're not there? It isn't necessary, and we should refrain from doing that. And I'm afraid within right speech nowadays, we also have to think about the use of social media, which is incredibly pervasive and can be incredibly harmful. I try not to get too involved in social media chats and things, because I couldn't bear the constant hostility and meanness that goes on in these places. You've only got to post anything on social media and somebody will come along with a really mean slap you down reply. So I try not to get too involved with social media chat. But if you do start reading posts, you'll find that most people are out there being actually really quite nasty to each other, which is interesting. But let's try and avoid doing that. Right action. Now, we talked about at the very, very first talk, I said there's no 10 commandments or things of that sort in Buddhism, but we do have a moral compass and an ethical code. And there are basically 5 precepts that practicing Buddhists will undertake to do. Now, when I say 5 precepts, this is for us lay folk. We will follow these 5 precepts. I'm afraid if you're a monk, you have to follow 277 precepts. And if you're a nun, you have to follow 311. But we won't go into those. We'll just stick with the big 5 that we need to do as Buddhists. So number 1 is we undertake to refrain from killing or causing harm to other living beings. And so we try to be harmless people, so not killing and not causing harm. Now, you might say not killing, that's very easy. I'm not going to go around and kill people, but you are harming people, aren't you, by some of the things that we do. And we undertake to be as harmless as we can. not taking what is not given. So you might translate that as not stealing and say, well, I don't steal. That's not a problem for me. But not taking what is not freely given to you. That can mean not taking up people's time if they're not willing to give it to you, not taking people's emotional energy if it's not being freely given to you. So not taking things that are not given freely, which means just being a little bit more sensitive to what people are prepared to offer. It also, the opposite side of that is generosity, trying to be as generous as you can be and generally giving things, but certainly not taking what's not yours and not being offered to you freely. And that, as much as taking people's possessions and stealing from people, it actually means taking up people's time, being an emotional drain for people. We try to avoid doing that. The third one is avoiding sexual misconduct, and this really should be more broadly translated into avoiding overindulging really in sensual pleasures. So avoiding sexual misconduct really means not getting into relationships which are where one person is suffering for the pleasure of another. So relationships which are manipulative, where there's a differential of power, where, it doesn't simply mean, no adultery, homosexuality is wrong. Not at all. It means avoiding getting into relationships where you're exploiting someone for your own pleasure, for your own benefit. It also means not overindulging in other sensual pleasures. So indulging maybe too much in food, in drink, in music, all the various things where you really are going above and beyond what's necessary. So trying to keep in relationships with people a degree of respect and, respect other people, treat other people in the way that you would like them to treat you, rather than treating other people as merely as objects for your own gratification. Avoiding false speech. We've really covered that a little bit in the previous element, but we avoid saying things that are untrue. We try to be as truthful as we can without being unkind, but we must try to avoid false speech and harsh speech and unnecessary speech. And then last but not least, abstaining from drink and drugs that cloud the mind. Again, this is a very narrow definition. I think the idea really is to avoid becoming intoxicated, because of course we're trying to work towards a clarity of mind where we can see things clearly as they really are. It's important. It's difficult to see things clearly when your mind is clouded by intoxicants such as drink or drugs, but also many other things are intoxicating, aren't they? Power and adulation, and all of those things can make us feel really quite intoxicated and full of our own opinions. We're trying to keep our minds clear. So I'm not saying if you're a Buddhist, you must be a teetotaler. And I'm not saying if you're a Buddhist, you must be a vegetarian. But what I'm saying is try to avoid intoxicating yourself with drink, with drugs, with other things, because we're trying to work towards clear seeing and clear thinking and not getting these cloudy, confused views of how things are. Right livelihood or right living. Now, in the Buddha's day, this would have been fairly straightforward. You could have said, well, this is a butcher and that's not right livelihood, or this is a mercenary or whatever, this is not right livelihood. It's slightly more difficult in our day and age. I'm assuming that nobody here is an arms dealer or a trafficker in human trafficker or anything of that sort. Those things are obviously not right living, right livelihood. I'm not saying we should all be ordained and become monks and nuns either, but there are certain ways of going about your business which are slightly more skillful and conducive to harmony and benefit other people more than others. So you can think, for example, if you're a teacher or a nurse or a doctor or a vet or a carer. These are skillful ways of going about your life. There are other things which are perhaps less skillful. I don't want to be overly pejorative about things, but if you are, am I going to dare to say this? If you're an Instagram influencer and your sole object in life is to subtly convince other people to buy this washing product or this particular type of trainers, I don't think that's really skillful, actually. That's convincing other people to want something that they don't actually need. So advertising executives, marketing, Instagram influencers, these for me would fall into the opposite of right livelihood. People who are basically making money from encouraging other people to do the one thing we're trying not to do, which is want and cling and crave. This would be an example of not right livelihood, which is just as obvious to me as dealing in drugs or dealing in arms or things of that sort. So right livelihood, be sensible about it, but think to yourself, is the way I am earning my living conducive to the greater good, or is it actually a harmful thing? And then finally, concentration, the ability to focus and really clear the mind so that you can actually live in the here and now and be where you are without drifting away into thoughts and aspirations. So right effort is the first of these elements. And there are 4 elements to right effort in the Buddhist teaching. The first effort we make is to discourage unwholesome qualities, particularly those 3 fires, greed, ignorance, and anger, from arising. Now, this isn't a really, it's almost like gardening. We'll come on to right effort and gardening in a moment. But if you want good things to grow in your garden, you have to have, the ground has to be properly prepared, and you cultivate the things you want to grow and you discourage the things you don't want to grow from taking roots there. In the same way, in our own lives, we want to discourage greed, anger, and ignorance from arising. And if those unwholesome qualities have already arisen, if we are already subject to clinging or desire or ignorance, we should try to let go of those things rather than constantly perpetuating those needs, those wants, those fires. But on the other hand, we want to cultivate skillful or wholesome qualities, particularly the opposite of those 3 fires. So generosity rather than greed, loving kindness rather than anger, and wisdom rather than ignorance. We want to cultivate those skillful qualities in the same way that we want to make the ground in our gardens conducive to the good things growing there. So the wholesome qualities have not yet arisen, need to be cultivated, and we need to strengthen those wholesome qualities that have already arisen. So those are the 4 elements in Buddhist teaching that constitute right effort. And as I say, it's like a gardener doing the gardening. And the reason it's called right effort is that those of you who garden will know that you can't just do the garden, walk away, and that's the garden done, because the weeds will grow back if you don't weed them out. The plants need watering, they need pruning. Gardening is a constant effort. You will pick up the leaves, and in a moment, another gust of wind comes along and blows more down, and it's a constant effort. If you're a gardener, you've never done. The garden is never finished. In the same way, in the Buddhist practice, you're never done. You're never going to be the finished object. You need constant, consistent effort to cultivate those wholesome qualities, to discourage those unwholesome qualities. Because if you just say, that's it, job done, moving on to the next step, then the weeds will come back, the plant will wither. You just need to keep on working at it. And in fact, many of the sort of teaching analogies in Buddhism come from, gardening analogies, because this idea of constant cultivation is really points to what right effort is about. Right mindfulness or right awareness. Mindfulness is obviously a really popular thing nowadays, isn't it? You can have classes in mindfulness in business and mindfulness in healthcare and mindfulness. In a Buddhist setting, it's more really thinking about awareness, bringing things into awareness that previously have gone unnoticed. So when you were sitting in the chair for 15 minutes and you suddenly started to notice how much chit chat was going on in your mind, how much your thoughts were being distracted with things that have come and things that have gone and what's happening next. It's a constant chatter going on there, but we're not aware of it. Once we start to cultivate awareness of what's happening around us, you start to notice things more. And you'll notice this as you start doing your meditation. Initially, when you start to meditate, you won't really notice the ticking of the clock or the cars moving by in the street or things of that sort, because you're too busy thinking about this, that, and the other. But as you progress, you start to notice things more and more and more. I remember one of my teachers telling me that when he started to meditate, there used to be a clock chiming because he was meditating at, say, midday or whatever. And he said he'd never really heard the 12 chimes of the clock because his mind had already drifted off to something else before the 12th chime. But eventually, as he continued to persist in his practice, he was able to be aware of and listen to all 12 of those clock chimes, because he was learned to keep his awareness present through practice. Awareness really of the 5 elements that make up our human experience, awareness of the form. So as we're sitting now, are you actually aware of your sit bones, of your feet on the floor, the temperature of the air around you? Or are these things, oh no, hadn't really noticed till you pointed it out. But these are things that we need to be aware of, is what's going on in our bodies. What are those sensations that are coming in, those feelings? What am I hearing now? What am I smelling? The thoughts, we've talked about the thoughts coming and going. There's nothing wrong with that. We need to be aware that our thoughts are coming and going, not get wrapped up in them, but not let them just drift along unnoticed. And all of that plays out in this element of consciousness, the stage on which all of this plays out, the stage of consciousness. Awareness, mindfulness. I want you all to do this one exercise for me right now, which is take a flesh on your arm and give it a good pinch. That sensation, you can all feel that, can't you? Awareness is you just sense the thing, there it is, there's the pinch. You don't have to think it through. What's that pinch like? Is it stronger than the pinch someone gave me the other day? Does it hurt? Does it not hurt? It's just there. Suddenly you've got a sensation and you've noticed it. Awareness, right mindfulness, right awareness is just being aware of things as they are right here, right now, without putting any spin on it, without putting any comparisons, likings, disliking. It's just, I'm aware of the sensation in my body, my thoughts coming and going. I'm aware of the sounds in the room. It's just there. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to judge it. I don't have to compare it. I just simply have to be aware of it. And then right concentration or right meditation. If awareness is the up and out, awareness of everything that's happening around you, concentration is more down and in, focusing your mind on one thing. This is anybody in a conference nowadays, is someone speaking and he looks around the room and there are people tapping away on their smartphones, because nobody wants to pay attention for a minute to what's happening unless the thing is very engaging. But we have to try not to go wandering off into the clouds in our thoughts and try and concentrate when we need to concentrate, we need to concentrate. And so we learn in meditation practice to concentrate on certain things that will help us to bring our minds back into focus, into the here and now. One of the things we concentrate on, for example, is our breathing. This is a very common concentration, a very common tool in meditation, is to concentrate on breathing or concentrate on sensations in the body. There are various things that you can do, but trying to focus the mind on the thing that you're focusing on rather than getting lost into thoughts about today, tomorrow, what's going to happen next week, what's for dinner, etc., etc. Through practice, you get better and better at doing this. It becomes easier and easier. But to begin with, when you start meditating, you can't concentrate for even 3 breaths in a row. Your mind is already off and wandering. And that's okay, but the practice is to bring it back and just keep beginning again. But we have to really train our minds to do this. It's easy to concentrate on something if it's interesting, absorbs us. So, you'll all have had this feeling of being lost in a book or in a film, or, you're really focusing on a task, a physical task, often, doing cross stitch or something of that sort will really focus you. You can concentrate when it's interesting and absorbs you. But if it's not interesting, and certainly when you're sitting in meditation, the only thing to concentrate on is your breathing, it can be extremely boring and tedious, but you have to train your mind, bring it back. Otherwise, you're not actually present, you're not actually living your life. As the Dalai Lama said, when asked what surprised him most about humanity, he answered, man. Because he sacrifices his health in order to make money, then he sacrifices money to recuperate his health. He's so anxious about the future that he does not enjoy the present, the result being that he does not live in the present or the future. He lives as if he is never going to die, and then dies having never really lived. It's a great quote because it really gets to the problem we all have, which is that we are so averse to being present in our lives now, here, in this moment, because it is boring. There's something else to think about, something else to absorb us, and it takes us away. But the trouble is, before you know it, you have missed 10 minutes, 20 minutes a day, and then suddenly you wake up and you look in the mirror and you go, oh my goodness, I'm 59. Where did my life go? Did I live it, or was I daydreaming? When you're young, you think always about the future. What's the next thing? What am I going to do next? What's happening in the next? And when you're old, you spend a lot of your time reliving the past and saying, I wish I'd done it like that, and I wish I hadn't done that. But we're never actually here now in this moment. And the reason we're never here now in this moment is because it's just too boring. And yet, if you cannot learn to stay present in the moment, then you're not actually living your life. You're simply letting things drift along. And one day you wake up and you go, oh, that's it now. Do I get another? No, that was it. So you've got to try to be present, and that requires practice. And we begin our practice on the meditation cushion, but also in our daily lives as well, trying to be present with what we're doing and not drifting away into thoughts and dreams and hopes and aspirations. But we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end of the course. So this is the Noble Eightfold Path. I found this on the web and I thought it was actually quite nice because it covers these elements, but in slightly more simple language. So right understanding or right view. Am I seeing what's really there? Or am I seeing what I want to see, what I think should be there based on my biases and my opinions? Right intention. What is my commitment to this? Am I doing this for me? Am I doing this for other people? What am I wanting to get out of doing this? Is my intention selfish or is my intention selfless? Right action. Am I living a good life? Am I practicing? Am I living up to the standards the Buddha set? Am I behaving myself? Right speech. Am I being unkind? Am I being untruthful? Am I saying things behind people's backs? Am I indulging in idle chit chat when really I should be focusing? Right concentration. Am I focusing, or am I simply lost in thought half the time? And right mindfulness. Am I actually here, present in the moment, or am I drifted away into thoughts? So there are various elements in the Noble Eightfold Path, but they should all be practiced in together concurrently. This isn't we do this, then we do this, we do this. We try to build all of these things together, and you have to keep working at it. So right effort. Am I pushing myself hard enough? Am I pushing myself not hard enough? Remember the middle way. This isn't a practice of extreme austerity, but nor is it a practice of sensual indulgence. We have to get the strings tension have to be correct. Right effort has to be the correct effort, but also has to be consistent again and again and again. Otherwise, your garden will overgrow, the weeds will come back. But you can do it. We can all do it. The Buddha said, in this fathom length body, with its thoughts, feelings, and perceptions, so those elements of the skandhas, is the world, the origin of the world, the end of the world, and the path leading to the end of the world. So those are the Four Noble Truths. You have everything you need to do a Buddhist practice within your own body, within your own thoughts and feelings, motivations. It's all, everything you need, you have. All you have to do is make a start and walk along that path. And it is a path that the Buddha laid out for us, and he showed us the way to go, but he said, you have to walk it. I can't do this for you. You have to walk it yourselves. But the path was very, very clearly laid out. The map is very, very good and very, very accurate, but we do have to walk it ourselves. Right, I'm going to set you some homework. And I call this the paperclip game. And I realize as I'm reviewing the slides for tonight's talk that paperclips are pretty much obsolete now, aren't they? No one uses paperclips because no one uses paper. I might as well have put a picture of a treasury tag up there, and most of you wouldn't even recognize what a treasury tag was. But there used to be these things called paperclips when we had this thing called paper. It doesn't matter what it is, any small object will do. But essentially, for maybe do this for a day. Let's say a paperclips. Let's say you put a handful of paperclips in one pocket. It might be paperclips, it might be pistachios, anything that's small and suitable. And then just be aware every time you say no to something, to a situation, when something arises and you are resisting it. When you notice that resistance, that inability to go along with the thing that is, take the paperclip or the pistachio nut or whatever out of your pocket and move it to the other pocket. And it'd just be an interesting exercise to see at the end of the day how many paper clips you've moved from one pocket to the other. In other words, how many times during the course of the day you resist and say no to something rather than saying, giving in and going along with. So just an interesting exercise, bringing up into your awareness how much we are resisting and negative to what's going on in life rather than being accepting of it. So try that. It won't be paper clips. I actually have paper clips in my drawer at work, but I don't know why I have them. no use for them at all. I should have brought them and distributed them among you lot for this exercise. But anyway, paper clips, pistachios, small marbles, anything you like that's of that suitable size. Okay, so I'm going to bring that to a close and I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And if you have some questions, we've just got 5 minutes. If you want to pop some questions in the chat, I will try to answer them. Yes, Lou, your hand is up first.
I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Yes. When you said about the exercise, when you said no, how many times you say no? Well, no is not necessarily bad, because if someone comes to you and say, oh, should we kill someone today? Of course, well, I would say no. Doesn't mean it's bad, so.
No, I'm not saying no per se is bad. What I'm saying is that resistance, it may not even be a verbal no. It's just a resistance to a situation that arises. Someone says, could you do such and such a thing? And your immediate thought is, why should I? I don't want to. You might get up and do it anyway, but the first reaction is, I don't want to do that. Or it might be annoyance that something has happened that hasn't gone your way. It's a resistance to a situation rather than going with the situation. It is perfectly right to say no when that is the correct response, although I have to say it's most difficult for most of us to actually say no. What we tend to say is yes, but get very vexed about it. But yes, to say no, I can't, I'm sorry, is fine. But saying, I don't want to do that, but I'm going to do it anyway because you're making me, and resenting it, that's the kind of reaction I'm looking for. Can you spot that resistance and refusal to go along with, rather than simply, is it a yes or a no? Well, it's a no. That's okay. If there's no heat in it, it's okay. But that kind of, I don't want to. That's really what I'm getting at.
Okay.
Now, I'm finding the notion, this is another question. I'm finding the notion of not wanting hard still. I've previously found it hard to want so as not to be let down. This leads to not being able to move forward. So I've been practicing learning to want, creating vision boards, etc. How do I do this without a strong desire? Well, it's perfectly appropriate to have likes and dislikes and preferences. But when those likes and dislikes and preferences become very strong, then you've gone too far. So I don't expect you not to have a preference for tea versus coffee or things of that sort. But what I do hope is that we'll learn to get to the point where we're not going to get very angry if we don't have the thing that we want in the way that we want it. So I told you about my friend last week who's decided that she's gluten-free and she won't eat gluten under any circumstances. A birthday party, a special celebration, a wedding, I don't eat gluten. Not because she's got an allergy, it's because she just chooses not to. And she's very attached to that, so attached that she will, A, deprive herself of nice food, and B, cause offense to the host who's provided the food. That's clearly wrong. But in terms of wanting things, I don't really see how encouraging yourself to want more and more things is going to lead you to anywhere other than suffering. The practice of letting go of your desires and things that you want to have, that is part of the Buddhist practice that leads you away from suffering. So if you see an object and you want to possess it and you focus your mind on it, this ultimately will cause suffering, because you can't have the thing, or if you have the thing, you can't keep the thing, you will lose it, and that will lead to suffering. So unless you want to pursue a life where you're going round and round and round, more and more suffering, you have to learn not to want, to desire, to attach, to cling to things. You have to learn to let go. Otherwise, the suffering continues, because suffering is driven by attachment and desire and wanting. It drives suffering, and preference is one thing, but attachment, clinging is quite another, and that will lead you to suffering. That is intrinsically part of suffering. Someone's asking about recording of last week's talk. they putting it up on the website. As far as I know, all the talks are recorded and will be posted on the website, so it will appear. Be patient, it will certainly appear there. Joe asking another difficult question. Does the Noble Eightfold Path encourage or require Buddhists to live in a dualistic world, making their own decisions about right speech, right action, etc.? Or by emptying the mind, do we naturally gravitate to right speech, right action, etc.? No, you're right. It isn't about my ideas about what's right and wrong, about what right speech, right action should be. If you're making your own decision based on my opinions and views, it's almost certainly going to be wrong, because it will be I bias and ultimately leading me towards what I prefer and what I don't prefer. But you will, if you're following a Buddhist practice wholeheartedly and with good intentions, you will naturally tend towards a more compassionate, harmonious, respectful way of life, because that is the way that our human nature will ultimately tend to take us. But we have to get away from the notion that I am driving this process forward through my own efforts and making this happen through my own efforts. We have to let things happen as they are, learn to go along with what is, and ultimately, as we purify the heart, we start to see things more clearly, we act with kindness and compassion, we will naturally gravitate in the direction towards nirvana. We will inevitably go that way if we are following the elements of the Eightfold Path with honesty, humility, and conscientious effort. Someone else, this is probably the last question because we're over time. How does right livelihood happen when work is creating art, but I need to be able to earn money until I can be paid? No, you can make art and sell it. Why not? That's fine. I'm not saying a shopkeeper is wrong livelihood. No, of course not. People have to buy things and people have to sell things. What I guess I'm saying is making people desire this brand of washing powder rather than that brand, because that's your job to get people to buy this product rather than that product. You're making people desire things that they don't really need, or, you're doing this simply to make money. Your livelihood as an artist is to create beautiful things, and you get paid for it, and that's what you do. That's not wrong. That's fine. What I'm saying is the cynical desire to manipulate people's wishes and wants just so that you can make money from it, that is falling now towards the path of wrong livelihood and away from where we should be, which is helping everybody to live more in harmony and have more satisfied lives, being satisfied with what we have, satisfied with less. Actually, the less that you want and the less that you need, the more satisfied you are with what you have. So I don't think there's anything wrong with being an artist and selling your work. No, I don't. I didn't mean that at all. But I think manipulating other people's wishes so that you can exploit them, that is wrong. Now, I'm going to have to stop there because we're over time. All of these talks will be published on the web, on the Buddhist Society website. My slides are sent to the Buddhist Society, so they will be available to you in your information, so you can refer to those. The teachings that I've given you, the stories, the parables, these are all also in your information packs as well. So anything you missed, you'll be able to catch up on at a later date. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. I'm just warning though, next week's topic is a real biggie, and it's quite a difficult one. It's karma, rebirth, and the wheel of life. It would help us greatly before next week if you can familiarize yourself with the wheel of life, what it looks like, because obviously I'll be trying to show you it, but it's not like I do have one on my wall upstairs, but I'm not bringing it down. It's a big topic. We'll have a lot of stuff, really challenging stuff to go through next week, but have a quick look at the wheel of life if you can, and then you know a little bit about what that picture looks like and what we're talking about. Okay, I will leave it there. I wish you all good night, and I'll see you next week.